Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Bibles and Beer. It is so glad to have every single one of you. It is time yet again for another updated twist on the Wednesday night Bible study that you may have grown up with. Today, Reverend Wendy Jerome, we have Wendy here tonight. We'll offer readings from the Hebrew and Christian scriptures that make up the Bible. We'll cover some of the Christian basics, explore the Bible's themes, contradictions, and the curiosities. Tonight, one man stands as a voice against Jewish and Christian apocalypse theology. Can you guess who that is? Well, Wendy is going to spend some time breaking it down, and I bet you it isn't who you think it is. So, Wendy, what do we got?
Okay. We're going to start out with some of his parables because a group. Let's see. Am I live? Am I hearable?
You're
Yes.
live and you're hearable,
Okay.
but you have frozen. I can't
I'm
see
frozen.
you moving.
I don't know why I'm frozen, but anyway, here we are.
And who are we talking about, by the way?
We're talking about this person who, in the first century, seems to have gone around talking to peasants in the Galilee. And the name that has been given to this person is Jesus. And Jesus, we'll just use Jesus as shorthand. But this storyteller has this unique, he talks in parables, a sort of a unique literary form. And some of his parables have been neglected because they're not comprehensible. Some of his parables are really offensive to the ideas of capitalism. And some of his parables have been adopted because they're handy. But we're going to look at two that kind of give you a flavor of what he's going at. He's constantly approached in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the parallel Gospels. He's constantly approached by people saying, what's the realm of God like? Or what's the realm of heaven like? And he will tell a parable. It'll be a short, kind of funky parable. I'm going to look at just two with you, and I picked these out because these are two. There's a group called the Jesus Seminar. It's a group that includes most people in the academicians in the English-speaking world of all faiths. There are Jews in it, Buddhists, Quakers, Unitarians, everybody's in it. Lots of Protestants, Roman Catholics, everybody's in it. And it's a group of academicians who are impatient with how long it takes to get things published and what a pain it is to get things moving in the religious world. People are actually blocking progress there. But they get together and they vote. And what are the things that are most likely said by an early first century person who would be speaking to peasants in the Galilee? And one of those parables that we find a lot of reinforcement for, and they voted most likely, is the parable of the leaven. I'm not sure we're able to show you the slide, but I'm going to read you the parable of the leaven. It'll be familiar to many of you. In Matthew, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. Here it is in Luke. The kingdom of God, it is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. And then it appears in a gospel that was not canonized. The earliest gospel, actually, it's the Gospel of Thomas, which we found several copies around the Mediterranean. In this gospel, the kingdom of the Father is like a certain woman. She took a little leaven and concealed it in some dough and made it into large loaves. Well, he's speaking to a group of people, peasants. So this is a very nice, homey little image for them, but it's sure to shock them because that's not what they're expecting for the kingdom of heaven. It's got a couple of really offensive, if you're a good Jew, things in it. Number one, leaven. Oh my goodness. Leaven is something we're told in Exodus is unclean. And in fact, that's why during Passover, you eat unleavened bread. Leaven was spooky. It's a little bubbling thing. So as many of you who've been making bread during our COVID shutdown will notice, it smells funny and it makes little funky burpy noises. It's got flatulence, dare we say. And so leaven wasn't thought of as it was thought of as being unclean. And not only in Exodus is it remarked that if you eat leavened bread during the Passover especially, you're going to be cut off from all of Israel. But also later in Mark and in 1 Corinthians,
Well, it appears like we're losing Wendy. Wendy, can you hear me? I think you might check to see if your mute button's on. Because I can't hear you. If you want, refresh and come back in. I was wondering if you might have hit a key or something. Thank you. Go ahead and refresh. And thank you everyone for hanging out with us while we work through some of these technical issues. Okay. I apologize all. Wendy will be back here very shortly. She's been discussing Leaven Parable. She's focusing primarily on Jesus' own words and his language as he speaks about his stance against apocalyptic literature. So here we go. Wendy, do we have you back?
yes, I hope so. Do you have my sound?
There we go.
Yay!
We got you.
Okay.
Woo.
Well, all right. The point I want to make about that little parable, which is, it must, was remembered orally because it's quick and short and it's shocking because we're talking about the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, and it's got leaven and it's got a woman in it. And we all know women are unclean in the first century.
And I apologize. I'll work to restore Wendy here just a moment. Okay. Okay, I'm going to pause this for a moment. We'll be right back. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay, Wendy, do we have you?
I'm here, I think, yes?
Yay!
Yay!
Okay.
All right, Pixie's got in it. All right. Well, very quickly, women are unclean, of course, and they're non-persons, of course, in the first century. And here Jesus has talked about, he's elevated the kingdom of heaven, or at least shocked the farmers hearing his story, that the kingdom of heaven is like a woman, unclean thing, using leaven, unclean thing, to make something we need that spreads and grows. Now that's an interesting little and let's see, I'm going to see whether we can do, I'm hoping that'll work. My sound looks good.
I can see you.
Okay, good.
Go for it.
I'm going to go for it. Okay, I'm going to take up another parable, which the Jesus Seminar folks they voted. They said this is very likely something that was spoken in the first century by somebody speaking to peasants in the Galilee, peasants and the impoverished in the Galilee. And this is the parable of the mustard seed. And I don't know how many of you have seen, people wearing mustard seed necklaces, and their understanding is that mustard seeds are so small and they grow. Well, it's the mustard plant. Let me just read it, the version as it appears in Matthew. It appears in Matthew, it appears in Mark, it appears in Luke, and it appears in Thomas. My goodness, it really says everybody was remembering this little nugget. The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Now, the other three are very similar to this. A mustard seed is this tiny, tiny seed, and then it becomes a tree that extends its limbs, and the birds of the air can make nests in its branches. Whoever's telling this story is telling a joke that the farmers will get. Because number one, the mustard that was in this part of the world is a terrible weed. And what's most noxious about it is that it spreads like crazy. You don't want it anywhere near your fields. You don't want it in your vegetable plot. You can't see the tiny seeds. They spread by the wind. They're awful. And this mustard does grow wild in the Near East. It's a terrible thing. You don't want it. It's a shrub. It's not a big plant. It's about as high as your knees. It does not become a tree. So Jesus is telling these people the realm of heaven is like this weed that you can't get rid of and spreads all over. Ugh. And then he says that it becomes like a tree. No, it doesn't. It's a tiny thing. But he is referencing something, this storyteller, he is referencing something that a good Jew would know about. There are two references to a tree growing, spreading its limbs, and becoming a home for the nests of all the birds of the earth. One of them is in Ezekiel. Ezekiel seems to be written around the 3rd century BCE. And Ezekiel he was taken off to Babylon in the Babylonian captivity. He was a guy who saw a lot of visions, pretty wild. He's telling all these people, we've been punished. We've been carried off into the Babylonian captivity because we're bad, and our God knows it. And we were naughty. We weren't good Jews, and but it's going to get better because we're going to be rescued, and we are going to be like a great tree that grows, a great cedar that grows up out of the earth, and it spreads its limbs, and all the birds of the air can sit in its branches. On the mountain height of Israel, I will plant it in order that it may produce boughs and bear fruit and become a noble cedar. Under it, every kind of bird will live. In the shade of its branches will nest winged creatures of every kind. All the trees of the field shall know. What a lofty vision. This is Ezekiel, okay? Also, a tree that spreads like this also appears in the book of Daniel, which was the bestseller of the 1st century BCE. You may know this, that among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are copies of parts of just about every book of the Hebrew canon, except for Esther. And there are lots of fragments and hunks of Daniel because people loved reading Daniel. Daniel's a Superman. And indeed, in Daniel, there is a passage where poor old King Nebuchadnezzar, he has this dream, and in his dream, he dreams of a tree, a tall cedar that grows and extends its limbs, and in its branches, all the birds of the world nest. And then Daniel has to say, well, that's a really nice image, but it's not going to work for you, Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. So Jewish peasants would be hearing this, and they were going to remember this because it's such a wacky response that this storyteller is giving them when they ask about the realm of heaven. It's totally wacky. I'm going to go offline and see if I can get back on again. Here we go.
We have you, Wendy. Wendy will be right back. Apologies all. We're just working through all the technical stuff. Tonight's been an interesting night, and we will see if we can get this handled and get Wendy back to you. So just one moment, and we will be right back. There we go, Wendy. Hello.
Hello.
So my text message I sent to you a while back, and you were actually going fine. So everyone heard what you were saying.
Okay, good. So we're good to go. We're going to proceed.
Yeah.
So
there we
what
go.
we've got. Okay. Now there are other parables that Jesus tells that are really counterintuitive, but I just thought I'd pick up these two because you can see that he's shocking people. This storyteller is. He's shocking people, and he's giving them a little nugget that is totally memorable because it's so counter to what they're expecting about the realm of God. So they remember it, and it lasts for 20 years at least in the oral retelling of the people. They have better memories than we do, after all, because they're illiterate. And it gets written down at the earliest moment. It makes it into Thomas's. And Thomas is writing his gospel around the early, 50, 51, 52, 53. Jesus dies around 30. We'll say the storyteller dies around 30. Then Thomas would be recording this 50, 51, 52, 53. And this is certainly, it's weird stuff. They aren't expecting this. People are not expecting this. This is why it's remembered. And we can tell they're going to fight with it. They're going to deny it as fast as they can. They're going to deny this storyteller. This storyteller was reacting against it's almost like I could compare it to a modern conspiracy theory, I believe. Ever since there were strange, unaccountable things, the giants of the sons of God looked down on the daughters of man and came down and took them, there have been some strange Gnostic material that floats through Judaism. And it seems to be very strong, even in the lives of Jews, especially during this very stressful period under the Romans. Here's our big example. The Qumram Sect, the folks who were living next to the Dead Sea at Qumran, those who found Qumran wanted to give them credit as the people who wrote or recopied all of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We know that is not true because the Dead Sea Scrolls are written in over 150 different handwritings. And there weren't that many people at Qumran. It's in the desert, you can't support more than a small group there. But the people who were living at Qumran did have documents that made it into the Dead Sea collection. It was probably a library that was brought down from Jerusalem, and then they added some of their own material. They believed that there was going to be a giant return of an angry God who was going to throw out the corrupt priesthood in Jerusalem and beat up on the Romans. And these people at Qumran, who kept themselves remarkably pure, I mean, they took, 5 or 6 baths a day in the same water. I'll just have to tell you that because here they are in the desert. They worked so hard on keeping themselves pure, they had to be ready to become the priests and fight with God, who was going to destroy the children of darkness. That was their name for the corrupt priesthood in Jerusalem and the Romans. Okay, everything that was going wrong in the world, they were the children of light, and they were going to. They produced this document called the War Scroll that describes this whole opening of the heavens, trumpets, a big army coming in and beating up the bad guys, and then they are going to make a new world. Ezekiel has also, you can tell in the Ezekiel I showed you earlier, or I mentioned earlier, you can tell that many Jews were expecting some kind of apocalyptic thing to happen, which would redeem them. Okay, some big salvific thing. This realm of God, this realm of heaven is going to be this big, it's going to be sudden. It's going to be a great blast. It'll be joyful for those of us who are the ones who are oppressed, and Israel will reclaim itself. It will be a pure Israel, and it will get rid of these nasty Romans and all the other nasty people in the world. And then there's this guy wandering around the Galilee and talking to peasants and poor people and telling these weird stories that are almost jokes about, no, the realm of heaven is a dirty person doing a dirty thing, making bread with leaven. The realm of heaven is this noxious weed that ruins your fields. What's going on? Well, we come closest to what Jesus was really saying, I think, when we look at Thomas, because Thomas is the first gospel to be written down. Gospel, it comes out, as I said earlier, in the early 50s of the first century CE. So we can see a little bit of what Jesus could have been saying there, because Thomas quotes Jesus 3 times talking about the realm of heaven. Much later, Luke, and we can date Luke to, the year 80. Some people put him as early as 70 or so, but he's much later, another 30 years later. He says nearly the same thing. I'm going to give you, maybe we can show the screen, which has the quotations from Thomas and Luke. I'm going to read what Thomas says. Thomas says, God's imperial rule is right there in your presence. The Father's imperial rule is spread out upon the earth and people don't see it. What you are looking forward to has come, but you don't know it. Now this matches those parables, the leaven and the mustard seed. It's common, it's dirty like us peasants, like us farmers. It's already among us. In Luke, which is the year 70, we get God's imperial rule is right there in your presence. I could read it to you in Greek, and it uses an interesting adverb. In the Greek, he basileia tou theou, entos humon estin. Entos means within and among you, okay? So Jesus is telling people this realm of God that they're expecting to appear as a giant apocalypse is already in and among them. All right? Very interesting. Perhaps some little progressive bells are going off in your head. Some of you tend to believe that the salvation, the only salvation that we will have as human beings, is going to come from us human beings making an effort. It's within us to help the world. Okay? You would be agreeing with Jesus here. But do those who take up the Jesus stories and continue with them until it becomes the Christian church get what Jesus was saying? I'm not so sure. Because if you look at 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 13 through 18, which is one of the earliest things that we're pretty sure Paul wrote this one, and he wrote it at the same time that Thomas was putting quill to vellum. Paul believes in an apocalypse, in a whomping big apocalypse. Paul's apocalypse is going to involve trumpets and violence and sudden excitement. He's excited about it, Paul is. Let me just read a little of that. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus God will bring with him those who have died. For this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, there's a coming of the Lord, will by no means precede those who have died. For the Lord himself, now here's the apocalypse, the Lord himself with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet, will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. And then it goes on to talk about how we will all be caught up. Paul is envisioning an apocalypse of sorts. It's not the military one that the good folk at Qumram were expecting, but it is a sudden thing with trumpets and fanfare, and God will be intervening in human history. And this is contemporaneous with Thomas's writing. Okay? What Jesus, I'm going to call him Jesus as shorthand, this first century storyteller who told these parables about the realm of heaven being already available within us, that has been forgotten and it's submerged by Paul. And Paul, super letter writer, the guy is prolific, he's going to take center stage and he's going to run with it. And we will lose what may be the first century storyteller's original belief about the realm of God or the realm of heaven. I'm going to stop there so that I can hear some of your thoughts and questions. Because I'm sure that this has brought some up for you.
So Terrell Brown asks and just mentions this comment that the whole idea of salvation just seems weird.
Coming in from the outside, right.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, it's like, and it's very old in Judaism. It starts with wacky things that are in the text that don't make sense in even in Genesis. And people invent whole conspiracy theories about it. That there's another realm out there and it's full of good spirits and this is a bad place. Part of the reasoning there is just following from the text because, God creates the world in 7 days and at the end of it he says, this is good. And the world that people are experiencing is not good. So they have a belief, these Gnostics, and they love to spread this conspiracy theory that the God of this world is actually a fake God, bad, an imposter, and there's actually a good God out there, something big out there that is going to come back and reclaim the earth and save us all. And this Gnosticism spreads. So yeah, salvation from outside. I like Carol's thought. It's a little bit, well, if you're desperately poor, if you're being stepped on in big ways by the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians, and then the Romans in a big way, you get desperate. I mean, I think we can extrapolate a little bit to the people who have been, for example, attacking the Capitol, who believe that the world is going all wrong. Their lives aren't so, I mean, they're not noticing the prosperity that was promised to their fathers in the beautiful 50s of the 20th century. And anyway, here we are. Salvation. Yeah, people wanted salvation in the first century because it was horrible. Actually, it was horrible. There were 3 earthquakes in the first century. There were like 3-year famines. They were huge famines. Evil old Herod the Great, you know, who we know is a bad guy. Evil old Herod the Great was actually nice enough not to collect taxes a couple of years because people were so poor. It was, you know, they were dying in the streets, right? Huge famines. So I think we have to imagine extraordinary stresses on these people. And that makes them vulnerable. That makes them vulnerable to big spooky hope. Some kind of a rescue has got to be coming.
So would you say, and again, you know, this is Jesus himself didn't actually talk about the rapture, but would you say that Jesus didn't buy the rapture?
I would say Jesus didn't buy the rapture. No way. No way. It's hyper late, tacked on at the end. I mean, if he's illustrating the realm of heaven and comparing it to dirty things in the lives of these common people who, and they're poor people. If they had water, they're not going to take a bath in it. They're going to use it on their fields, you know. These are poor people. They know they are the disregarded. They are the disregarded. The priestly classes in Jerusalem look down on them because they can't afford to come and offer sacrifices in the temple. They are considered, and they consider themselves to be bad Jews, dirty people.
Yeah.
They are weeds. They are like leaven. They are unclean. The imagery would match the people with whom he's speaking. And he's reaching out to them, identifying with them. I don't know what his stories would hope to do. How would this comfort you if you were, you know, you just had to sell your kids into slavery because you have nothing? But how would this comfort you to believe that you have it in you to create the realm of heaven? Gosh, you'd have to be a truly amazing person to integrate that and live with it. You'd have to have the kind of peace that's within the Dalai Lama to move ahead with that.
Yeah.
Maybe Jesus was hoping for that. I don't know.
Well, and there's so much that goes into that. I am not personally a mythicist, but there is a pretty strong. There is a case to be made that there was no Jesus, that this is a set of writings and teachings that were written after the fact, or a conglomeration of multiple individuals. And there's a pretty significant case to go into that. And the rapture as a concept really is only a 200-year-old concept when you really think about it. And a lot of the apocalyptics has gone through many phases, as we understand, right? And you can probably give so much more clarity on, you know, different times of the Christian church, specifically the early church, and their buy-ins to apocalypse literature. And it's when they're going through their most stressful times that they're looking at the end, assuming that the end is here. You can see that in Paul's apocalypse literature.
They could have been exposed to some of those ideas of heaven and hell, and an ultimate lifting up by the good God is pretty prominent in Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism is, of course, the religion of the Persians. And the Persians restored this whole area after the Babylonians. You know, so there's there's some Aramaic culture, the Zoroastrian belief and stuff that could have influenced them. I don't think it's I don't think it's in what the early first century storyteller meant to say. It's coming along late. Poor storyteller. And I guess since we know so little about the storyteller, the Jesus Seminar has a saying that they know so little about Jesus that they need to expect that Jesus might be a woman. Oh my God. But which would be pretty unlikely. But
so let's go ahead. It is hitting right at the end here. We're going to go ahead and call it quits for our stream on YouTube. Thank you all for bearing with us as we went through all the technical fun and glitches, and I hope that you had an opportunity to learn from Wendy. Wendy's going to be available for some question and answer are you going to be able to join us for the after party?
I'm going to give it a shot here. I'm going to see if I can do that.
I threw the link to you in the private chat. So I'm going to throw this into our chat here. So if you want to join us in a kind of our after party, we're going to have a Zoom meeting where we can have question and answer with Wendy Jerome, Reverend Wendy Jerome. So take a look in your chat feed and you should see that message. Anyways, thank you again so much for joining us. Reverend David Breeden will be back next Wednesday at 7 o'clock to continue. And join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for Coffee and Wisdom. Thanks all for joining us. We will catch you later.